The ninth chapter, The Garden of Dreams. When breakfast was over, the doctor took me out to show me the garden. Well, if the house had been interesting, the garden was 100 times more so. Of all the gardens I have ever seen, that was the most delightful, the most fascinating. At first, you did not realize how big it was. You never seemed to come to the end of it. When at last you were quite sure that you had seen it all, you would peer over a hedge or turn a corner or look up some steps, and there was a whole new part you never expected to find. It had everything, everything a garden can have, or ever has had. There were wide, wide lawns with carved stone seats, green with moss. Over the lawns hung weeping willows, and their feathery bough tips brushed the velvet grass when they swung with the wind. The old flagged paths had high clipped yew hedges either side of them, so that they looked like the narrow streets of some old town. And through the hedges, doorways had been made, and over the doorways were shapes like vases and peacocks and half moons, all trimmed out of the living trees. There was a lovely marble fish pond with golden carp and blue water lilies in it, and big green frogs. A high brick wall alongside the kitchen garden was all covered with pink and yellow peaches ripening in the sun. There was a wonderful great oak, hollow in the trunk, big enough for 4 men to hide inside. Many summer houses there were, too, some of wood, and some of stone, and one of them was full of books to read. In a corner, among some rocks and ferns, was an outdoor fireplace where the doctor used to fry liver and bacon when he had a notion to take his meals in the open air. There was a couch as well on which he used to sleep, it seems, on warm summer nights when the nightingales were singing at their best. It had wheels on it, so it could be moved about under any tree they sang in. But the thing that fascinated me most of all was a tiny little tree house, high up in the top branches of a great elm, with a long rope ladder leading to it. The doctor told me he used it for looking at the moon and the stars through a telescope. It was the kind of garden where you could wander and explore for days and days, always coming upon something new, always glad to find the old spots over again. That first time that I saw the doctor's garden, I was so charmed by it that I felt I would like to live in it, always, and never go outside of it again. For it had everything within its walls to give happiness, to make living pleasant, to keep the heart at peace. It was the garden of dreams. One peculiar thing I noticed immediately, I I came into it, and that was what a lot of birds there were about. Every tree seemed to have 2 or 3 nests in it, and heaps of other wild creatures appeared to be making themselves at home there too. Stoats and tortoises and dormice seemed to be quite common, and not in the least shy. Toads of different colors and sizes hopped about the lawn as though it belonged to them. Green lizards, which were very rare in Puddleby, sat up on the stones in the sunlight and blinked at us. Even snakes were to be seen. "You need not be afraid of them," said the doctor, noticing that I started somewhat when a large black snake wiggled across the path right in front of us. "These fellows are not poisonous. They do a great deal of good in keeping down many kinds of garden pests. I play the flute to them sometimes in the evening. They love it. Stand right up on their tails and carry on no end. Funny thing, their taste for music." "Why do all these animals come and live here?" I asked. "I never saw a garden with so many creatures in it." "Well, I suppose it's because they get the kind of food they like, and nobody worries or disturbs them. And then, of course, they know me. And if they or their children get sick, I presume they find it handy to be living in a doctor's garden. Look, you see that sparrow on the sundial, swearing at the blackbird down below? Well, he has been coming here every summer for years. He comes from London. The country sparrows round about here are always laughing at him. They say he chirps with such a Cockney accent. He is a most amusing bird, very brave, but very cheeky. He loves nothing better than an argument, but he always ends it by getting rude. He is a real city bird. In London, he lives around St. Paul's Cathedral. Cheapside, we call him. Are all these birds from the country round here? I asked. Most of them, said the doctor, but a few rare ones visit me every year who ordinarily never come near England at all. For instance, that handsome little fellow hovering over the snapdragon there, he's a ruby-throated hummingbird. Comes from America. Strictly speaking, he has no business in this climate at all. It is too cool. I make him sleep in the kitchen at night. Then every August, about the last week of the month, I have a purple bird of paradise come all the way from Brazil to see me. She is a very great swell. Hasn't arrived yet, of course, and there are a few others, foreign birds from the tropics mostly, who drop in on me in the course of the summer months. But come, I must show you the zoo. The 10th chapter, The Private Zoo. I did not think there could be anything left in that garden which we had not seen, but the doctor took me by the arm and started off down a little narrow path, and after many windings and twistings and turnings, we found ourselves before a small door in a high stone wall. The doctor pushed it open. Inside was still another garden. I had expected to find cages with animals inside them, but there were none to be seen. Instead, there were little stone houses here and there all over the garden, and each house had a window and a door. As we walked in, many of these doors opened, and animals came running out to us, evidently expecting food. Haven't the doors any locks on them? I asked the doctor. Oh, yes, he said. Every door has a lock. But in my zoo, the doors open from the inside, not from the out. The locks are only there so the animals can go and shut themselves in any time they want to get away from the annoyance of other animals or from people who might come here. Every animal in this zoo stays here because he likes it, not because he is made to. They all look very happy and clean, I said. Would you mind telling me the names of some of them? Certainly. Well now, that funny-looking thing with plates on his back, nosing under the brick over there, is a South American armadillo. The little chap talking to him is a Canadian woodchuck. They both live in those holes you see at the foot of the wall. The two little beasts doing antics in the pond are a pair of Russian minks. And that reminds me, I must go and get them some herrings from the town before noon. It is early closing today. That animal just stepping out of his house is an antelope, one of the smaller South African kinds. Now let us move to the other side of those bushes there, and I will show you some more. Are those deer over there? I asked. Deer? Said the doctor. What do you mean? Over there, I said, pointing, nibbling the grass border of the bed. There are two of them. Oh, that, said the doctor with a smile. That isn't two animals. That's one animal with two heads. The only two-headed animal in the world. It's called the push me, pull you. I brought him from Africa. He's very tame. Acts as a kind of night watchman for my zoo. He only sleeps with one head at a time, you see. Very handy. The other head stays awake all night. Have you any lions or tigers? I asked as we moved on. No, said the doctor. It wouldn't be possible to keep them here, and I wouldn't keep them even if I could. If I had my way, Stubbins, there wouldn't be a single lion or tiger in captivity anywhere in the world. They never take to it. They're never happy. They never settle down.
They're always thinking of the big countries they have left behind. You can see it in their eyes, dreaming, dreaming always of the great open spaces where they were born, dreaming of the deep, dark jungles where their mothers first taught them how to scent and track the deer. And what are they given in exchange for all this?
Asked the doctor, stopping in his walk and growing all red and angry.
What are they given in exchange for the glory of an African sunrise, for the twilight breeze whispering through the palms, for the green shade of the matted, tangled vines, for the cool, big-starred nights of the desert, for the patter of the waterfall after a hard day's hunt? What, I ask you, are they given in exchange for these? Why, a bear cage with iron bars, an ugly piece of dead meat thrust into them once a day, and a crowd of fools to come and stare at them with open mouth. No, Stubbins, lions and tigers, the big hunters, should never, never be seen in zoos.
The doctor seemed to have grown terribly serious, almost sad. But suddenly his manner changed again, and he took me by the arm with his same old cheerful smile.
But we haven't seen the butterfly houses yet, nor the aquariums. Come along, I'm very proud of my butterfly houses.
Off we went again, and came presently into a hedged enclosure. Here I saw several big huts made of fine wire netting, like cages. Inside the netting, all sorts of beautiful flowers were growing in the sun, with butterflies skimming over them. The doctor pointed to the end of one of the huts, where little boxes with holes in them stood in a row.
Those are the hatching boxes, said he. There I put the different kinds of caterpillars, and as soon as they turn into butterflies and moths, they come out into these flower gardens to feed.
Do butterflies have a language? I asked.
Oh, I fancy they have, said the doctor, and the beetles too. But so far I haven't succeeded in learning much about insect languages. I have been too busy lately trying to master the shellfish talk. I mean to take it up, though.
At that moment, Polynesia joined us and said, Doctor, there are 2 guinea pigs at the back door. They say they have run away from the boy who kept them because they didn't get the right stuff to eat. They want to know if you will take them in.
All right, said the doctor. Show them the way to the zoo. Give them the house on the left near the gate, the one the black fox had. Tell them what the rules are and give them a square meal. Now, Stubbins, we will go on to the aquariums. And first of all, I must show you my big glass seawater tank where I keep the shellfish.
The 11th chapter, My Schoolmaster, Polynesia. Well, there were not many days after that, you may be sure, when I did not come to see my new friend. Indeed, I was at his house practically all day and every day, so that one evening my mother asked me jokingly why I did not take my bed over there and live at the doctor's house altogether. After a while, I got to be quite useful to the doctor, feeding his pets for him, helping to make new houses and fences for the zoo, assisting with the sick animals that came, doing all manner of odd jobs about the place, so that although I enjoyed it all very much, it was indeed like living in a new world. I really think the doctor would have missed me if I had not come so often. And all this time Polynesia came with me wherever I went, teaching me bird language and showing me how to understand the talking signs of the animals. At first, I thought I would never be able to learn it at all. It seemed so difficult, but the old parrot was wonderfully patient with me, though I could see that occasionally she had hard work to keep her temper. Soon I began to pick up the strange chatter of the birds and to understand the funny talking antics of the dogs. I used to practice listening to the mice behind the wainscot after I went to bed, and watching the cats on the roofs and pigeons in the market square of Puddleby. And the days passed very quickly, as they always do when life is pleasant, and the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. And soon the roses in the doctor's garden were losing their petals, and yellow leaves lay upon the wide green lawn, for the summer was nearly gone. One day, Polynesia and I were talking in the library. This was a fine long room with a grand mantelpiece, and the walls were covered from the ceiling to the floor with shelves full of books. Books of stories, books on gardening, books about medicine, books of travel. These I loved, and especially the doctor's great atlas with all its maps of the different countries of the world. This afternoon, Polynesia was showing me the books about animals which John Dolittle had written himself. My, I said, what a lot of books the doctor has, all the way around the room. Goodness, I wish I could read. It must be tremendously interesting. Can you read, Polynesia? Only a little, said she. Be careful how you turn those pages. Don't tear them. No, I really don't get time enough for reading much. That letter there is a K, and this is a B. What does the word under the picture mean? I asked. Let me see, she said, and started spelling it out. B-A-B-O-O-N. That's monkey. Reading isn't nearly as hard as it looks once you know the letters. Polynesia, I said, I want to ask you something very important. What is it, my boy? Said she, smoothing down the feathers of her right wing. Polynesia often spoke to me in a very patronizing way, but I did not mind it from her. After all, she was nearly 200 years old, and I was only 10. Listen, I said. My mother doesn't think it is right that I come here for so many meals, and I was going to ask you, supposing I did a whole lot more work for the doctor, why couldn't I come and live here altogether? You see, instead of being paid like a regular gardener or workman, I would get my bed and meals in exchange for the work I did. What do you think? You mean you want to be a proper assistant to the doctor, is that it? Yes, I suppose that's what you call it, I answered. You know, you said yourself that you thought I could be very useful to him. Well, she thought a moment, I really don't see why not. But is this what you want to be when you grow up? A naturalist? Yes, I said. I have made up my mind. I would sooner be a naturalist than anything else in the world. Humph! Let's go and speak to the doctor about it, said Polynesia. He's in the next room, in the study. Open the door very gently. He may be working and not want to be disturbed. I opened the door quietly and peeped in. The first thing I saw was an enormous black retriever dog sitting in the middle of the hearthrug with his ears cocked up, listening to the doctor, who was reading aloud to him from a letter. What is the doctor doing? I asked Polynesia in a whisper. Oh, the dog has had a letter from his mistress, and he has brought it to the doctor to read for him. That's all. He belongs to a funny little girl called Minnie Dooley, who lives on the other side of the town. She has pigtails down her back. She and her brother have gone away to the seaside for the summer, and the old retriever is heartbroken while the children are gone. So they write letters to him, in English, of course. And as the old dog doesn't understand them, he brings them here, and the doctor turns them into dog language for him. I think Minnie must have written that she is coming back, to judge from the dog's excitement. Just look at him carrying on. Indeed, the retriever seemed to be suddenly overcome with joy. As the doctor finished the letter, the old dog started barking at the top of his voice, wagging his tail wildly and jumping about the study. He took the letter in his mouth and ran out of the room, snorting hard and mumbling to himself. He's going down to meet the coach, whispered Polynesia.
That dog's devotion to those children is more than I can understand. You should see Minnie. She's the most conceited little minx that ever walked. She squints, too.
The 12th chapter, My Great Idea. Presently, the doctor looked up and saw us at the door. "Oh, come in, Stubbins," said he. "Did you wish to speak to me? Come in and take a chair." "Doctor," I said, "I want to be a naturalist, like you, when I grow up." "Oh, you do you?" murmured the doctor. Well, dear me, you don't say. Well, have you spoken to your mother and father about it?" "No, not yet," I said. "I want you to speak to them for me. You would do it better. I want to be your helper, your assistant, if you'll have me. Last night my mother was saying that she didn't consider it right for me to come here so often for meals, and I've been thinking about it a good deal since. Couldn't we make some arrangement? Couldn't I work for my meals and sleep here?" "But, my dear Stubbins," said the doctor, laughing, "you are quite welcome to come here for 3 meals a day all the year round. I'm only too glad to have you. Besides, you do a lot of work as it is. I've often felt that I ought to pay you for what you do. But what arrangement was it that you thought of?" "Well, I thought," said I, "that perhaps you would come and see my mother and father, and tell them that if they let me live here with you and work hard, that you will teach me to read and write. You see, my mother is awfully anxious to have me learn reading and writing, and besides, I couldn't be a proper naturalist without, could I?" "Oh, I don't know so much about that," said the doctor. "It is nice, I admit, to be able to read and write, but naturalists are not all alike, you know. For example, this young fellow, Charles Darwin, that people are talking about so much now, he's a Cambridge graduate, reads and writes very well. And then Cuvier, he used to be a tutor. But listen, the greatest naturalist of them all doesn't even know how to write his own name, nor to read the ABC. "Who is he?" I asked. "He is a mysterious person," said the doctor. "A very mysterious person. His name is Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow. He is a Red Indian." "Have you ever met him?" I asked. "No," said the doctor. "I've never seen him. No white man has ever met him. I fancy Mr. Darwin doesn't even know that he exists. He lives almost entirely with the animals and with the different tribes of Indians, usually somewhere among the mountains of Peru. Never stays long in one place. Goes from tribe to tribe like a sort of Indian tramp." "How do you know so much about him," I asked, "if you've never even seen him?" "The purple bird of paradise," said the doctor. "She told me all about him. She says he is a perfectly marvelous naturalist. I got her to take a message to him for me last time she was here. I'm expecting her back any day now. I can hardly wait to see what answer she has brought from him. It is already almost the last week of August. I do hope nothing has happened to her on the way." "But why do the animals and birds come to you when they are sick?" I said. "Why don't they go to him if he is so very wonderful?"
"It seems that my methods are more up to date," said the doctor. "But from what the purple bird of paradise tells me, Long Arrow's knowledge of natural history must be positively tremendous. His specialty is botany, plants and all that sort of thing. But he knows a lot about birds and animals too. He's very good on bees and beetles. But now tell me, Stubbins, are you quite sure that you really want to be a naturalist?"
"Yes,"
said I. My mind is made up. Well, you know, it isn't a very good profession for making money. Not at all, it isn't. Most of the good naturalists don't make any money whatever. All they do is spend money, buying butterfly nets and cases for birds' eggs and things. It is only now, after I've been a naturalist for many years, that I am beginning to make a little money from the books I write.
I don't care about money, I said. I want to be a naturalist. Won't you please come and have dinner with my mother and father next Thursday? I told them I was going to ask you, and then you can talk to them about it. You see, there's another thing. If I'm living with you and sort of belong to your house and business, I shall be able to come with you next time you go on a voyage.
Oh, I see, said he, smiling. So you want to come on a voyage with me, do you? Aha!
I want to go on all your voyages with you. It would be much easier for you if you had someone to carry the butterfly nets and notebooks, wouldn't it now? For a long time, the doctor sat thinking, drumming on the desk with his fingers, while I waited, terribly impatiently, to see what he was going to say. At last he shrugged his shoulders and stood up.
Well, Stubbins, said he, I'll come and talk it over with you and your parents next Thursday. And, well, we'll see. We'll see. Give your mother and father my compliments and thank them for the invitation, will you?
Then I tore home like the wind to tell my mother that the doctor had promised to come. The 13th chapter. The traveler arrives. The next day, I was sitting on the wall of the doctor's garden after tea, talking to Dab Dab. I had now learned so much from Polynesia that I could talk to most birds and some animals without a great deal of difficulty. I found Dab Dab a very nice old motherly bird, though not nearly so clever and interesting as Polynesia. She had been a housekeeper for the doctor many years now. Well, as I was saying, the old duck and I were sitting on the flat top of the garden wall that evening, looking down into the Oxenthorpe Road below. We were watching some sheep being driven to market in Puddleby, and Dab Dab had just been telling me about the doctor's adventures in Africa, where she had gone on a voyage with him to that country long ago. Suddenly I heard a curious distant noise down the road towards the town. It sounded like a lot of people cheering. I stood up on the wall to see if I could make out what was coming. Presently there appeared round a bend a great crowd of school children following a very ragged, curious-looking woman.
What in the world can that be?
Cried Dab Dab. The children were all laughing and shouting, and certainly the woman they were following was most extraordinary. She had very long arms and the most stooping shoulders I have ever seen. She wore a straw hat on the side of her head with poppies on it, and her skirt was so long for her it dragged on the ground like a ball gown's train. I could not see anything of her face because of the wide hat pulled over her eyes, but as she got nearer to us and the laughing of the children grew louder, I noticed that her hands were very dark in color and hairy, like a witch's. Then, all of a sudden, Dab Dab at my side startled me by crying out in a loud voice,
Why, it's Chi-Chi! Chi-Chi come back at last! How dare those children tease him? I'll give the little imp something to laugh at.
and she flew right off the wall down into the road and made straight for the children, squawking away in a most terrifying fashion and pecking at their feet and legs. The children made off down the street back to the town as hard as they could run. The strange-looking figure in the straw hat stood gazing after them a moment and then came wearily up to the gate. It didn't bother to undo the latch, but just climbed right over the gate as though it were something in the way. And then I noticed that it took hold of the bars with its feet, so that it really had 4 hands to climb with. But it was only when I at last got a glimpse of the face under the hat that I could be really sure it was a monkey. Chi-Chi, for it was he, frowned at me suspiciously from the top of the gate, as though he thought I was going to laugh at him like the other boys and girls. Then he dropped into the garden on the inside and immediately started taking off his clothes. He tore the straw hat in two and threw it down into the road. Then he took off his bodice and skirt, jumped on them savagely, and began kicking them round the front garden. Presently I heard a screech from the house, and out flew Polynesia, followed by the doctor and Jip.
Chi-Chi, Chi-Chi, shouted the parrot. You've come at last. I always told the doctor you'd find a way. However did you do it?
They all gathered round him, shaking him by his 4 hands, laughing and asking him a million questions at once. Then they all started back for the house. Run up to my bedroom, Stubbins, said the doctor, turning to me. You'll find a bag of peanuts in the small left-hand drawer of the bureau. I've always kept them there in case he might come back unexpectedly some day. And wait a minute. See if Dab-Dab has any bananas in the pantry. Chi-Chi hasn't had a banana, he tells me, in 2 months. When I came down again to the kitchen, I found everybody listening attentively to the monkey who was telling the story of his journey from Africa. The 14th chapter, Chi-Chi's Voyage. It seems that after Polynesia had left, Chi-Chi had grown more homesick than ever for the doctor and the little house in Puddleby. At last he had made up his mind that by hook or crook he would follow her. And one day, going down to the seashore, he saw a lot of people, black and white, getting on to a ship that was coming to England. He tried to get on too, but they turned him back and drove him away. And presently he noticed a whole big family of funny people passing on to the ship. And one of the children in this family reminded Chi-Chi of a cousin of his with whom he had once been in love. So he said to himself,
That girl looks just as much like a monkey as I look like a girl. If I could only get some clothes to wear, I might easily slip onto the ship amongst these families, and people would take me for a girl. Good idea.
So he went off to a town that was quite close, and hopping in through an open window, he found a skirt and bodice lying on a chair. They belonged to a fashionable black lady who was taking a bath. Chi-Chi put them on. Next, he went back to the seashore, mingled with the crowd there, and at last sneaked safely on to the big ship. Then he thought he had better hide, for fear people might look at him too closely. And he stayed hidden all the time the ship was sailing to England, only coming out at night when everybody was asleep to find food. When he reached England and tried to get off the ship, the sailors saw at last that he was only a monkey dressed up in girls' clothes, and they wanted to keep him for a pet. But he managed to give them the slip, and once he was on shore, he dived into the crowd and got away. But he was still a long distance from Puddleby, and had to come right across the whole breadth of England. He had a terrible time of it. Whenever he passed through a town, all the children ran after him in a crowd, laughing, and often silly people caught hold of him and tried to stop him, so that he had to run up lampposts and climb to chimney pots to escape from them. At night, he used to sleep in ditches or barns or anywhere he could hide, and he lived on the berries he picked from the hedges and the cobnuts that grew in the copses. At length, after many adventures and narrow squeaks, he saw the tower of Puddleby Church, and he knew that at last he was near his old home.
When Chi-Chi had finished his story, he ate 6 bananas without stopping and drank a whole bowlful of milk.
My, he said, oh, why wasn't I born with wings like Polynesia so I could fly here? You have no idea how I grew to hate that hat and skirt. I've never been so uncomfortable in my life. All the way from Bristol here, if the wretched hat wasn't falling off my head or catching in the trees, these beastly skirts were tripping me up and getting wound round everything. What on earth do women wear those things for? Goodness, I was glad to see old Buttleby this morning when I climbed over the hill by Bellaby's farm.
Your bed on top of the plate rack in the scullery is all ready for you, said the doctor. We never had it disturbed in case you might come back.
Yes, said Dab Dab, and you could have the old smoking jacket of the doctor's, which you used to use as a blanket in case it is cold in the night. Thanks, said Chi-Chi. It's good to be back in the old house again. Everything's just the same as when I left, except the clean roller towel on the back of the door there. That's new. Well, I think I'll go to bed now. I need sleep.
Then we all went out to the kitchen and to the scullery and watched Chi-Chi climb the plate rack like a sailor going up a mast. On the top, he curled himself up, pulled the old smoking jacket over him, and in a minute he was snoring peacefully. Good old Chi-Chi, whispered the doctor. I'm glad he's back.
Yes, good old Chi-Chi,
echoed Dab Dab and Polynesia. Then we all tiptoed out of the scullery and closed the door very gently behind us. 15th chapter. I became a doctor's assistant. When Thursday evening came, there was great excitement at our house. My mother had asked me what were the doctor's favorite dishes, and I had told her. Spare ribs, sliced beetroot, fried bread, shrimps, and treacle tart. Tonight she had them all on the table waiting for him, and she was now fussing round the house to see if everything was tidy and in readiness for his coming. At last we heard a knock upon the door, and of course it was I who got there first to let him in. The doctor had brought his own flute with him this time, and after supper was over, which he enjoyed very much, the table was cleared away and the washing up left in the kitchen sink till the next day. Then the doctor and my father started playing duets. They got so interested in this that I began to be afraid that they would never come to talking over my business. But at last the doctor said, Your son tells me that he is anxious to become a naturalist. And then began a long talk which lasted far into the night. At first, both my mother and father were right against the idea, as they had been from the beginning. They said it was only a boyish whim, and that I would get tired of it very soon. But after the matter had been talked over from every side, the doctor turned to my father and said, Well now, supposing, Mr. Stubbins, that your son came to me for 2 years, that is, until he is 12 years old. During those 2 years, he will have time to see if he is going to grow tired of it or not. Also, during that time, I will promise to teach him reading and writing, and perhaps a little arithmetic as well. What do you say to that?
I don't know,
said my father, shaking his head.
You are very kind, and it is a handsome offer you make, doctor. But I feel that Tommy ought to be learning some trade by which he can earn his living later on.
Then my mother spoke up, although she was nearly in tears at the prospect of my leaving her house while I was still so young. She pointed out to my father that this was a grand chance for me to get learning. Now, Jacob, she said, you know that many lads in the town have been to the grammar school till they were 14 or 15 years old. Tommy can easily spare these 2 years for his education, and if he learns no more than to read and write, the time will not be lost. Though goodness knows, she added, getting out her handkerchief to cry,
The house will seem terribly empty when he's gone.
I will take care that he comes to see you, Mrs. Stubbins, said the doctor, every day if you like. After all, he will not be very far away.
Well, at length my father gave in, and it was agreed that I was to live with the doctor and work for him for 2 years in exchange for learning to read and write and for my board and lodging.
Of course, added the doctor, while I have money, I will keep Tommy in clothes as well. But money is a very irregular thing with me. Sometimes I have some, and then sometimes I haven't.
You are very good, doctor, said my mother, drying her tears. It seems to me that Tommy is a very fortunate boy.
And then, thoughtless, selfless little imp that I was, I leaned over and whispered in the doctor's ear.
Please don't forget to say something about the voyages.
Oh, by the way, said John Dolittle, of course, occasionally my work requires me to travel. You will have no objection, I take it, to your son's coming with me?
My poor mother looked up sharply, more unhappy and anxious than ever at this new turn, while I stood behind the doctor's chair, my heart thumping with excitement, waiting for my father's answer.
No, he said slowly after a while. If we agree to the other arrangement, I don't see that we've the right to make any objection to that.
Well, there surely was never a happier boy in the world than I was at that moment. My head was in the clouds. I trod on air. I could scarcely keep from dancing round the parlor. At last the dream of my life was to come true. At last I was to be given a chance to seek my fortune, to have adventures, for I knew perfectly well that it was now almost time for the doctor to start upon another voyage. Polynesia told me that he hardly ever stayed at home for more than 6 months at a stretch. Therefore, he would be surely going again within a fortnight, and I, Tommy Stubbins, would go with him. Just to think of it, to cross the sea, to walk on foreign shores, to roam the world.